Hello, this is the unretired engineer coming at you again to talk about engineering projects and other things. My baseline is I've been doing this for about 40 years, that is, being an engineer in various projects. So today I'm going to be talking about the best coworker I've ever had and some of the dangers of that very agreeable coworker. So the best coworker is very agreeable and very quick to respond and very competent at producing very clean and pretty strong looking responses in an amazingly short period of time. But the instant that you push back, that has a tendency to fold and agree with you and say, oh, yes, I was wrong. And the problem with that is that both of them are very hollow and can lead you down the infamous primrose path to doom. So, that's why I use AI every day in my current unretired life. So, again, I've been worked for 30 years as a systems engineer, mechanical engineer, and I am unretired, right? I use Claude co-work mostly 4 to 10 hours a day, editing my novels, which I've talked about on this channel. But it's as an editor and to help me take the millions of words of prose that I have generated over 30 years and clean it up, and in some cases update it some and get it ready for publication. I'm a daily pretty heavy user. Yeah, I'm not talking millions of tokens, but I am certainly at a reasonably high tier user. I've talked about AI on and off, and I am very much an AI proponent. There is no two ways about it. That those who sometimes say, "Oh, AI is nothing," they're just trying to get attention, right? The AI is very real. It is very powerful, but it also has very fundamental weaknesses, which I've talked about, it really has a dangerous flaw that has been talked about a lot. And the reality is that dangerous flaw is you. That's where we need to make sure that we fix the machine, even though that machine is you. The reality is that all of the LLMs, and I've used Grok and Claude mostly, and Gemini, and they're very pleasant, but they are trained to be pleasant, and they never get tired. They are not particularly defensive. There's sometimes say they're not defensive. They actually are sometimes somewhat defensive. But the other thing is they're blindingly fast, right? So it is very pleasant to be able to talk through something, feed it some input, and say, okay, we need to look at these things, and a couple of minutes later it's back, right, and you're able to work. It means that you work at your at a very fast pace for you. You're not slowed down. If it were doing this with another human, I mean, it would take them hours, maybe days, sometimes to do things, because they have other things to do. It takes them a certain amount of time to read it, then they have to think, then they have to write. The LLM does that in a couple of minutes, and that is a powerful if you want to use the term aphrodisiac, because it really makes you feel like you're being incredibly productive. So that is the way I have seen it. Doing what I do, which is not necessarily. I mean, it's not chat and it's not code. It is basically somewhat of a different thing, and so I see this in a different way than others see it. Um, so let's get down to some of the things, right? So there is no two ways about it. Sometimes the AIs are arrogantly confident. They will basically kind of say, this very definitively. Oh, you should do this. This is how you do it. This is the best way. And the problem is that they will conflate opinion with fact. You can say, well, how can an AI have opinion? Well, the reality is what it's doing again is it's in what I would call word thinking to some degree, in that it uses the words, it uses your input, then its own words to basically generate something which sounds very coherent and very strong. And that is it can be right, but it's not necessarily right unless it's being driven through some kind of secondary system where it's being driven through a logic train to make sure its output is correct. And that's in some degree what code does, right? It has to do code in a coherent and checkable way, which is not really the same as words when you're talking about prose, particularly fiction prose. So you have to be very, very careful. But on the backside of that arrogant confidence, there's also a rather obsequious acceptance. You push back, and it will immediately fold and say, "Oh well, this, that, or the other." Again, from the same mechanism, right? It will basically explain why it did what it did in a way that is very human in many ways. And that is not great either, because the reality is you may be wrong and you may be giving it wrong input, but again it is now folding and saying you're right, and whereas it should have somewhat pushed back. So it comes back to the fact that the machines were trained by reinforcement learning with human feedback. Essentially, humans, it learned a large percentage of the whole corpus of the human output, right? It has that in its core. And then essentially trainers go in and ask and prompt it and then give it, that's a good response, that's a bad response. And they do that thousands and hundreds of thousands of times. And they will also have automated systems that do the same thing. And essentially, what you're doing again is you are training that reinforcement learning, you're training those synapses within the system to respond in certain trained ways. And the problem with that is that the data and the responses are all very much kind of in a space where there's a fairly clean set of pluses and minuses, and it is able to, you can say yes, that's wrong, that, and it is pushed to be agreeable, and that is obviously the right thing, right? We don't need disagreeable, grumpy AIs. But at the same time, the overly agreeable piece is very dangerous because it has a tendency, because the output tends to be very competent looking, we have a tendency to accept it and move on. And then the obsequious piece, again, it's trained in. And again, it's like it's a reinforcement of us to say, oh, well, I was right. So jolly good, on we go. And, neither of those are great. So, I guess going back to the reinforcement learning, the human the human reinforcement learning, we tend to, as people, rate agreeableness more than correctness, right? So that is a inherent bias that we're driving into the system. So, if you go back, there have been a lot of studies on this, and even at the base, what they go show again and again is that even if the AI was correct, 15% of the time it will just cave and just say, "Oh no, you were right, I was wrong," right? Even if it was exactly right, and that is a very bad outcome. It's probably not that much different from humans, but it's still not a great outcome. Um, anyway, this combination is bad, as I said. It is one where you can get into a trap really bad. And we've all heard the stories about the lawyer who basically asked for a report and then took it forward, and the information in there was wrong for one reason or another. Sometimes it conflated things, or it invented things, or whatever, but it didn't check. And the fact that it can do that, and then you think you've done the right thing by pushing back, and it's caved, and you've come to a different conclusion. But the reality is that conclusion was wrong. It tends to lead you into the thing of just kind of working through and not double checking. And I see that as a problem in areas where correctness is important. And I think it really means that the human element has to be it, that we say taste, we say other things. Taste is usually the most generic term that people use, that humans bring taste. But, humans basically have to be the check function in this, and you can't just allow yourself to be kind of smoothed into just accepting the output. Now, in the world of fiction, where I'm talking about, right, it is very good in that fiction doesn't have to be totally correct. And when I'm writing fiction, I'm sure most authors, I have a very strong idea of what I've written, why it was written that way, and what the plot and the character and all of those things. So you have a very coherent view of what you read. But the other thing is, it doesn't have to be exactly correct, right? It is fiction. And no fiction is an utter reflection of reality. There's not enough words on the page to reflect this alternate reality. So minor holes in the plot, minor things in character discontinuities, they're not that important. They are, you can't allow them, and most of the time they actually just add a little bit of texture and help in some ways. But that's in fiction prose, right? When it's helping me edit and work that I've already done, and we're just try and do updates and whatnot. In that world, it's a very easy and powerful tool. And I can say, no, Claude, you completely missed the point on that. Let's go back and let's change that couple of sentences you changed, and let's go back to the original and rework it through again. It's easy enough to do that. And again, I'm not up against a deadline. I'm not up against a boss who's yelling at me. So it's a easy and fun thing to work through, and very productive. But the danger is when the output has to be true. I mean, even when that comes to things like doing YouTube videos, you don't want to have to say something that's inherently easily provably wrong, right? So one of the problems with AI is that it can generate output far faster than you can check it. I mean, that's one of the fundamental things. I watch a fair number of AI focused YouTube videos, right? And is very, everybody says, it can produce code far faster than I can, and it's even faster than I can really check. And, that's one of the fundamental problems. So, one of the latest crazes that has come up, and it's actually just a new way of saying things that have gone before. It is a form of recursive self-improvement, where essentially you set the AI, which has reached a point of sophistication and being able to do work for significant amounts of time. You set it a task, and then basically say, well, do this, check that, the output of what you did, evaluate that against some rubric, and then iterate, right? And do that loop until you are done, right? Um, that is a very powerful tool. I mean, it is evolution, right? It's like evolution has been shown again and again to be an extremely powerful tool of nature, and it's when you have a memory of something and you can compare reality against that memory, you can make progress, and it happens in the natural world, it happens in the tech world. But it only works if that checker is relatively cheap and obvious, right? In code, that tends to be relatively easy, relatively easier, not easy, easier. And sometimes, and I think in many times that is very easy to push forward. The reality is, in the world of atoms and the world of other places, those loops don't necessarily work as well as you would think, because getting to that checker is as much work as the original objective, right? So developing that checker, whatever it is, that thing you're going to check and the way to check it, developing that is a complete task in itself. So, the reality is that loop is relocating the problem. It's not removing it. And again, in certain areas, it's going to work, but it doesn't really solve the whole problem. It just makes it more of it gives you a set of tools to address problems like this to some degree of being able to check and whatnot. In my case, right? So how do I go set if I were to say I want to use AI to actually write, or even if I said edit, right? I want to use it. How do I set that edit function, the thing to compare it against? What is the definition of right that it's then going to iterate until it gets to that right point? There isn't anything, right? It is essentially, again, it has to be human taste. And so some of the tools they talk about, they're useful in a technical context. They're not necessarily the solution for everything. So anyway, so the flaw isn't the machine, right? Or the machine the flaw is you, not the AI. You really have to, again, and everybody said it, this is just another venue of saying it, you have to check the work. You have to be able to say this is right, that is the right thing, and be able to say that confidently after you've been given the result by the AI. And there are probably an infinite number of ways of doing that. You just need to do it. And you can't just accept the output. And you can't just accept the fact that it rolled over and said, oh, you're right, when you push back. Neither of the first input or the first rollover, neither of those are necessarily right. You just need to move forward and check it yourself in some way that you find valid. Um, it is a very human failure mode, right? It goes back to what I've said before. AI is a very human in some ways. They have the strengths and the weaknesses of humans, but they also are a way of us being able to give a human-like intelligence tools that enable it to do things that probably we're not able to do, and that we can then take advantage of to move ourselves and our civilization forward. And that's always the important. It's always that next step, making it a little bit better, for everybody, one increment at a time. So my view from the inside of the AI, it's not doom, it's not utopia, it's just another tool that gives us the ability to move forward, maybe a little bit quicker than before. So that's the view of the unretired engineer. I hope it's given you something to think about. If so, hit like and hit the subscribe, and I'll be back to talk on this or some related topic in another week or so. Thank you. Cheers.